The Life Sciences DNA podcast is sponsored by Agilicium Labs, a collaborative space where Agilicium works with its clients to co-develop and incubate POCs, products, and solutions. To learn how Agilicium Labs can use the power of its generative AI for life sciences analytics, visit them at labs.agilicium.com. Amar, we've got Steve Swan on the show today. For people not familiar with Steve, who is he?
Steve is the CEO of the Swan Group, which is an executive recruiting firm for biopharma companies. The firm specializes in recruiting people for positions that require data science, machine learning, and AI background. He's also the host of the Biotech Bites podcast.
And what are you hoping to hear from Steve today?
I would like to see what insights he can offer on the supply and demand for data analytics and AI talent across the healthcare and biopharma, and how the rapid advances are changing the talent needs for these companies. Also like to see whether companies are sticking to candidates with very specific industry backgrounds, or if they're having to look outside the industry to find the talent that they need.
Well, before we begin, I want to remind our audience that if they want to stay up on the latest episodes of the Life Sciences DNA podcast, they should hit the subscribe button. If you enjoy the show, please give us a like and let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And an audio-only version is available on major podcast platforms. With that, let's welcome Steve to the show.
Steve, thanks for joining us. We're going to talk today about the growing use of data analytics and AI, how this is affecting the demand for specialized skills in healthcare and biopharma, and what companies are doing to find the talent that they need. So let's start with the big picture. How has the demand for AI and data analytics talent in healthcare and biopharma changed over the past few years?
Well, first of all, Amar, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'd say over the years, we started, if you go all the way back, right? I think, you and I have had this discussion. Once when we got together, talked about how maybe it went from big data, right? Then it went into analytics. Now it's into AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the way it's changed over the years that I've seen is, more the tool, right? More the tool that folks are using, and more what they're using to crunch their numbers, whether it, back in the day, and still to some extent today, they use SAS, right? But now we have algorithms, right, that are going to do the AI work for us and such. But, it's always been about the data, Amar. You and I talked about that, right, for all these things. And we're continuing to, in my opinion, based on what I see in the needs for new hires and such, struggle with that, right? We really need to make sure that our data is in shape. But I don't think over the years it's changed substantially. I think we've changed the names, but I think the general premises are the same. And like you and I talked about in the recent past, I think it's about frameworks and really thinking about everything properly, right?
Okay. And are you was there some point of inflection that you can think about, where the demand has been growing for data analytics? Let's say if you take last 20 to 30 years, has the demand been just growing gradually, or have there been points of inflection where something new came up and then there was just a lot of demand right away after that as the industry pivoted?
Well, if I had to say, I'd say, data science really became a thing, right? Say 2014, 2015.
Okay.
And then it really started taking off, the demand for the analytics and then AI. Right? So with the amount of data that we have and the amount of ability to store it, retrieve it, slice it and dice it, that really started growing exponentially. Like I said, 2014, 2015. But it's a problem still with the amount of data that we have. On my podcast, as I talk with a lot of the CIOs, and I think there's some of the same folks that you chat with, they again, going back to my comment from my first answer, they can make that shiny object, right, to do some of those analytics and things, but it's more about that data and what the input is and how you're going to make that make sense, right? So I think with the increase in the ability to store and hold on to all that data, the inflection point, if I had to put my finger on it, really started ramping up in 14 and 15. And then I'd say exponentially over the last 2 years with AI. you know,
wow. Okay.
in a
Okay.
big way,
Okay.
in a big
And
way.
do you see the demand spread through the industry, or are there like specific roles that are in highest demand within some of these domains?
So there's specific roles, I think, commercial and clinical, right? Especially, right? You and I talked about that, I think, at some point. The commercial stuff is going to be more linear, right? So the commercial is going to be, only one time a year you're going to do an IC plan or something. But when you look at the marketing side of things, right, that's where you really get a lot of the different data. And then on the clinical side, same thing. If you start pumping in there, EHR and EMR data and all sorts of different things, you're getting things from many, many different angles. So the different roles that I see that are out there, are folks that do understand some of that data, because in order to, know what your output is you're looking for, really where you're going, you gotta know what's going in, right? So, a lot of the companies really are looking at some of these folks that understand it. Now, some of the leaders that I talk to in these companies are starting to, again, acknowledge their data shortcomings, right? Because they've got 20 and 30 years worth of data and they got to get back through it, right? And so they have their whether it is directors of data science or analytics, or even AI, right, that are doing their number crunching and looking at all this stuff. They tell me that they're getting frustrated because some of these leaders are doing data triage. They've got to, as they're going through and doing their thing, they got to deal with the data, which you don't need to be spending what you spend on that person to do triage on the data, although you do probably need that person in good proximity to the person doing the analytics, right? You probably don't want to wait a half a day and have somebody on, somewhere else in another, East Coast, West Coast, whatever that is, to do that. You probably want somebody that can help you, triage that data at a lower cost, and that's really what they do. So my solution and my comment to those folks was, get involved with a lower level data scientist, maybe right out of school or with a year or two of experience. They'd be glad to do your data triage, and they'd probably be pretty good at it. You're not paying them as much as you are to your director, and your director and associate director can keep doing the higher level tasks they're doing, and then that junior level person can then, get up to speed.
So it's basically I mean, the way I think about it, right? Like when you look at some of the different type of roles here, right? So you have on the one side to put the data in one place, right? You have data architects, you have data engineers, right? Who are putting those things data together. Then you have the data scientists who are like these, machine learning experts who are coming with the algorithms. But then you also need these, you need like some of these ops people, right? Operations people, like, data ops or like machine learning ops. And then you all have like these analysts, the business analysts who are actually doing that, right? So these are like the different types of people you need. So how do you from what you're saying is that, yes, there is hiring, but that are people realizing more that, okay, well, the data needs to be in place for the other people to actually operate, right? So we need a lot of people who are like data architects, data engineers to actually get the data in shape.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I know I've seen studies, 70% of these projects actually fail. And the reason being is because, in my opinion, based on what I'm reading, that we're putting the cart before the horse, right? So we're going out and a lot of the IT folks are getting some pressure from the business side, whoever that might be, to build out, some great stuff that we can use and make money with, right? Improve our profitability, which is absolutely a noble cause and what we're supposed to be doing. However, we go ahead, we put the cart before the horse by building that technology, right? That engine. But we don't have the gasoline for the engine ready, which is the data we're talking about, and you and I talked about that, I think, one day over lunch, right? It just gets, it gets crazy where, and if on some of my podcasts, if you looked at any of those, all those CIOs at these biotechs say the same thing, that the data is just, for the most part, isn't there. It's not ready. They can get it ready. We can get it ready, but it's going to take a lift, right? And so to your point, if you put that team in place, right, the data engineers, the data architects, the DevOps, right, all those folks, you're going to need all that in place to automate that cleanup and to get that done.
Yeah. And in terms of like the different domains on research, clinical development, commercial, so you're seeing the demand across the board, or are there specific domain where you're seeing a lot more demand?
Which domain am I seeing more demand in?
And I'm asking you, is there like specific domain where you see more demand? So if you look at, let's say, research versus clinical development versus commercial, medical affairs, like are there specific areas where there is there's a lot more demand for data AI people, or is it kind of like spread across the board in
I'd say on the
else?
clinical side is where they've applied it most, right?
Okay.
Where they've had
Okay.
the most success, where they've utilized these folks and where they've been successful, and that's going to continue, right? I think the research side is the holy grail, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
In order to shorten that cycle. I mean, if you look at these CEOs that get skewered on C-SPAN because of the prices they charge, they all default back to their 10-year research cycle or whatever that number is. And if they can utilize AI to lop off 6 months, a year, imagine. I mean, that'd be great. But right now, the clinical has so much data and so much stuff around it. They can already use AI to kind of help that whole process out, automate some of it, do things a lot quicker than we can staring at it with our manual programs, which I mentioned earlier, a SaaS or something like that, right? So
Okay. And see, now the demand is increasing quite a bit. Supply, there is a bit of a shortage. So are companies primarily looking for candidates with the pharma industry experience, or are they open to talent from other industries as well?
So they're open to talent from other industries at the lower levels, at the more senior levels. They're going to look for the specific, domain knowledge, right? So when they want that person that's going to, if I can just go back a second, I think that the industry, because I only know this industry, our industry in particular, when it comes to technology folks that they look for, got very, very focused on, we need exactly this, right? So that's continuing in this field as we go up the ladder in seniority. And, I've been doing this 25 years, and that started, like I said, maybe about 10 years ago that started. 20 years ago, it wasn't that way, but it's gotten a lot more specific. And AI and data analytics and such has only increased that need and that drive and that, requirement, if you will, right?
Okay. Now, so that's interesting. So that's why, like, the newbies you can get from different industries, but the leadership level, the pharmas want some experienced people to provide the right guidance. Then,
absolutely, yeah, and they want the folks that do have the technical as well as the business knowledge. So, some of them look for. I've seen folks look for sometimes scientists first, IT guy second, where they got into science and they knew that they wanted to do X, Y, and Z, but they're pulling their hair out. How do I do this? Well, they develop their own technical solutions, and then they stumble into one of these fields, right? And then lo and behold, they're really valuable to the rest of the guys and girls sitting next to them, because they can do stuff real quickly with either their automation or their technology that they couldn't do, 3 months, 6 months, a year before. So lots of times at this more senior level, it is, business side, science first, and then technology second. It really is.
Now, the data analytics AI, is that been growing more in IT or also in the analytics or data analytics functions within the business, right? Because there's usually the IT and then the business function, right? And then there's the business, right? So it's basically IT, the business data analytics, and then actually, let's say, marketing or scientists. So where is this growing, and how are they working together? Like, what are you seeing there?
Well, so you got sometimes you got the technology folks in business, right? Sometimes you got shadow IT in the business, and then sometimes you got legitimate IT. And then also when it comes to the data, the business still owns the data for the most part, and then the platforms and such that they sit on, IT's owning and running and figuring it out. So I've seen it on both sides, and I get the calls for both of those, whether it's in business or IT, because you're not gonna call somebody that specializes in commercial sales folks for their AI person that's in, the commercial department, right? It's just they're not gonna be able to handle that, right? So likewise for the data side of things, right? When they're working on data and the data platforms, I mean, someone's got to own the data and work through the data and handle the data. But as far as, again, going back to the DevOps folks and all those folks that are handling all that, they're IT folks. So they too are going to come to me. So I see it in both. I see it in both sides of things, both business and IT. But for the most part, I mean, the IT folks are going to own those data platforms. For the most part, they're going to be the analytics folks are going to be on the business side, and the AI folks can kind of be on either side. It just depends,
Okay. Okay. Is there like a specific model that you've seen working better than the other, or like are any
You
of
mean
these
as far
models
as
gonna
on
work?
what side it belongs on?
Yeah, yeah. Like the talent, right? Like as you're hiring these talent, and then you're looking at how these specific groups are doing, whether they're doing well or not. Like, is there like specific operating model that you've seen being more successful than the others, or is it like it just depends on people more?
Well, so the one that I've seen that works best from where I sit, right,
Yeah.
is if the folks that are doing the analysis, the analytics, and the AI work that they're looking for somebody to do actually sits in and reports to business, right?
Okay.
Because a lot of organizations do tend to see the IT group as less of a, they don't have for the most part, don't have a P&L. They're more of a cost center. But the business is looked at by, a lot of the higher ups. And if it's commercial, if it's clinical, if it's R&D, whatever it is,
Yeah.
they've got more of the attention, right? So if they are looking for that AI person, that analytics person, they're going to get more attention to it than IT would.
Okay.
In my
Okay. So
opinion.
that's okay. Okay. So more like the data engineering, data architecture, data DevOps, those more on the IT side, but then the more like the insights, analytics, then using, let's say, Gen AI to get more of the insights, more on the business side. Yes.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about it, as you just summarized that for me, you're right. And this is the first time I've thought about this and articulated this, is that if that's the case, right, then that could be part of the catalyst as to why our data's in not in as good a shape as it could be in, right? Because if the data platforms and all the technology, the DevOps sit in IT, and IT's getting a little bit less attention or a little bit less resources or a little bit less ability to handle that, and they've got all this other stuff, their day-to-day they've got to do, that's more proactive. So maybe they're not given the budget. I don't know. This is all speculation. Maybe they're not given the right budget to do all that. And maybe that's part of the reason why we're behind a little bit on that data. But I don't know. Again, just to, all the CIOs that I've interviewed, though, have said that the data, they've got to get through a lot of data, and it's real tough to do,
Okay. Okay. Now, are companies interested more in people with the IT background, or with the business expertise, or does that depend on, like, how does that depend on the role?
It does depend on the role. So, like I mentioned earlier, lots of times they're looking for the scientist first and the the technologist second. That would be on the research side, right? The clinical side, I mean, as long as you've done some of that work before, right? Like the manual SAS work, or you really got some great statistics, because that's a lot going on there, right? And then onto the commercial side, they're not too worried about it if you're doing analytics on the commercial side, whether you know what the territorial alignment is and all that fun stuff, right? That seems to be less so. That's more, do you have the chops to do what we're looking to do? Maybe they would look for somebody that knows the data sets. So that data would tend to come from an IQVIA or an IMS or a Symphony, that kind of one of those places.
Okay. Okay. And is there like a typical level of education that employees are looking for these specific, like, AI or data analytics role? I'm talking more about like these data analytics or data scientists, AI type of roles, rather than just like the data roles. But like, is there something that they especially look for?
I think from an education perspective, they're not super particular, but I'll tell you, all the best ones that I've found and all the best ones that I've seen tend to have their masters. They've got their masters in data science, whether they went to, I'm not far from Lehigh. Columbia's got a great program. I've been told that NYU's not super great, but I had a kid that went to NYU, so, but yeah, but there's some programs that are better than others. I think Pitt's got a good one, that are viewed more favorably than others. But for the most part, the ones that get the those higher level roles and those good roles tend to have their masters in data science.
Yes.
You know?
Okay. Now, you mentioned that in the last couple of years with this rise of generative AI, that there's a lot of demand for people. But do you see that companies have thought through in terms of exactly, what they want to, who they want to hire, what kind of profiles, what they want to do? Is that something clear, or do you think that companies are rushing to just get some of these people and try, and then they'll figure out?
Amar, it's so all over the map. It really is. I mean, I can get a call from somebody that knows exactly, I need this, and perfect, let's go, just like AI, you got to tell it what you're looking for, and it'll get there. But then I have had the calls for, the first question is, well, what are we doing? What's the overall goal here? Well, if I hear from somebody, well, I just want to make sure I have somebody doing this kind of work because I don't want to miss out or whatever. The whole FOMO thing, I can't get involved because that's now 3-6 months. If that doesn't work, that's my fault, right? And I don't, I do well enough getting myself in trouble, right? So, I don't need help, but, yeah, it's kind of all over the map where they are on their, on the scale of we need this to we don't really know anything that we need. It is changing a little bit, and I think you're probably getting to this, but it just popped into my head. Any of the latest trends, right, in AI. The biggest one that I see right now is we're all trying to get to the point, or well, I guess we're all scared of AI thinking and reasoning and taking us, running, Arnold Schwarzenegger-ish, right? But to get the algorithms closer to reasoning, if you will, in the current computer paradigm that we're in, they're starting to, the latest trend that I'm seeing is they're starting to basically apply high school math, right? Algebra and calculus to prove out these theorems, to prove out these algorithms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and there's even some tools that can help with that. So some of these AI companies that are only involved with AI are hiring some of those folks and are looking for some very, very few people are doing it right now. But it's to help, again, to help these algorithms get better at what they're doing. So building the algorithms, fine-tuning them, then proving them out with math to get them better at reasoning. Now, the folks that I talk to that do that are telling me that, in order to really get them to reasoning, we got to change our whole computing, paradigm to neural networks. You and I kind of went into that when we spoke in the past, which we're not at yet. But this is going to help our algorithms, this whole proving it out with our math to help them get to a better reasoning place. How it actually works, I'm not the guy or girl that does it, but I don't know. That apparently is, the latest thing literally over the last month or so.
Okay. Now, do you see these pharma companies developing the basics of the algorithms themselves, or do you see kind of them like delegating that to like the vendors and then them like more focused on the application of those in their specific business problems?
So I see them doing it themselves. There's some progressive ones out there. I can name, I won't name them here, but I see some progressive ones that are doing their own. They're building their own algorithms, and some of them have gotten to the point where they've spun out and they're like, wow, this is pretty cool. Let's create this little side company or whatever, to do this. They don't seem to be relying much on the vendors to do that. But it brings up a point that I've had with some of my CIOs is that if I build my own algorithms, right, and I do my thing with my algorithms and building out my AI, where does 21 CFR Part 11 fall into that? Where does I mean, how close am I getting to the FDA validation need on that? I don't know. But Steve Swan doesn't know, and that's not Steve Swan's never going to solve that. But it's a thought, and I've had a couple CIOs or other folks even say to me that they could see each company having its own sort of stock algorithms, and I said, well, if it's a stock algorithm, it's going to be solving the same problem all the time, right? Maybe I'm wrong, but then you validate that once, you're done, so I don't know, but yeah, they're not relying a whole heck of a lot on the vendors that I see to build
Okay.
those out for them. I see them
Okay.
doing it a
Yeah.
lot
Because
themselves.
it seems that they can build that easily, right? That's kind
Yeah.
of like what they're saying. I think we're gonna see some of the more challenges about how do you implement it enterprise wide and stuff like that, right? So it's I'm not sure how feasible this model is of everyone building their own custom algorithms, because you need a lot of those, right? And then
You do.
do they have the kind of manpower to actually continue to build that, right? And as changes are happening in Gen AI, are they able to sustain that, right?
Well, yeah, no, I'm going to just say no, they don't. They can't sustain all
Mhm.
that because it's
Mhm.
the need's growing, the
Yeah.
database is growing, which we just talked about,
Yes.
and there's a run on the somewhat of a run on the market for the talent. So everything's moving in the wrong direction for that to continue, right? you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
in
And
my
so
opinion.
let's yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's see. I mean, I guess no one knows right now, right? It's about like how this is all gonna shape up in the next 2-3 years.
They don't. They have no idea. But the wild thing about this, and again, in the past, I think we talked about this, how quick this all moves. Like
Yeah.
these proving out these theorems with the math, and I hadn't heard about this, and then all of a sudden I started hearing about it. Like that's like the newest, coolest, and obviously some folks are doing it and loving it and having fun doing it. But it's just this thing's flying.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Now, kind of flipping the coin, we talked about these companies want to hire people, and especially junior level folks, they're open to hiring people from other industries. But are AI experts willing to join pharma industry when they have a lot of opportunities in, let's say, tech sector or like finance industries? Do you see them joining easily, or is there a lot of reluctance in these people for joining the pharma industry?
Reluctance and they're not sure what that's going to do for them as they join the pharma company, because the AI experts for the most part tend to be at a lot of those maybe more sexy tech companies, so they see
Yes.
it as an older industry and stuff. But again, some of these companies have made these little spin-outs, so those AI experts would join those, and maybe that's their solution, right? Because
Okay.
if you create a little cool platform company, if you will, right? Now I'm working for Steve Swan AI company over here, as opposed to Steve Swan Biotech, right? Oh, I work for
Okay.
these guys, but who's serving? SS
Yeah.
AI is servicing Steve Swan Biotech, so you're kind of working for the same. But and then on top of that, the tech companies will also, um, I think, pay them better, right?
Yeah.
Farmers they've got their salary bands, so and
Yes.
and it is what it is. You can't change that. And the tech companies are tech companies, so they can layer on what they need to layer on to get the right folks.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that was kind of like my next question, which is like, what are some of the strategies that are more effective in attracting this talent, right? In this competitive market, tech companies we know can pay a lot, right? Yeah, healthcare company, yeah, pharmas pay very well as well, but not as much as tech. So how do they try to attract that? I know there's like one angle about talking about doing well for the humanity, right? Like as so
Like the
that's one
mission.
angle. But what are some of the other strategies that these companies are using?
Well, when you talk about doing well for humanity or whatever the mission is on the company, I
Mhm.
think you need a person or a group or whatever you're doing, because getting the right talent's a multi-pronged process, right?
Mhm.
And one of the steps in that process is attracting the talent. How do you attract the talent? You got to
Yeah.
tell them an effective story, right? Because you're
Yeah.
identifying it first. We can all find that, right? We all have the same database on LinkedIn, but then it's qualifying them, then it's attracting them, then it's actually closing it. And
Yeah.
in order to attract and close, you need to be an effective storyteller and be able to articulate to that person, first understand what they need, understand what the
Right.
company needs, bring those together. If the candidate only cares about stock options and it's a big pharma company that can't give them, we're already off to the wrong start, right?
Yeah.
But if they want a small startup where they get a bunch of stock options of a company that potentially could grow, now we have to explain to them, okay, this is why these options could make some money, and this is what they're going after, and then they
Okay.
continue to investigate through their process. So that's some of the things that they're doing. And to your point, uh, uh, the mission within pharma is something that does attract some folks, but not everybody goes towards that. Only some do. You know, I always make the analogy to looking for a new position as to cars, right? So there's a reason why cars come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, options. Positions are the same thing. Do I only care about a 3-mile commute? That's a different story than if I care about, the bigger mission. Or that's a different story as to whether I am at a small startup that gives me a lot of stock options or whatever. So what they're doing to attract more talent is to try and figure out. They got to figure out what the talent wants and what it needs.
Okay. Yeah. And how do you see this talent, especially coming from other industries, to be settling into pharma? Or do they at some point get frustrated and go back to the tech? Because especially these people we're talking about, what data scientists, they do need to at some point understand how the pharma business works, which is a pretty complex business. It's not that easy to do that, right? So, like, are you seeing any trends around that at this point?
Of them going back to
Yeah. So
yeah.
people coming from different industries, like tech background, joining the pharma industry, and then are they then settling down, saying, okay, well, I like this, or are they saying more like, I don't know where this is going, let me go back to tech?
Personally, I think you can mitigate that from day one, right? The attrition back to tech industry, unless you're just looking for a hired gun to come in and you don't mind if they leave. But if you really look for somebody to join SS Biotech, right, for the long term, make sure that you understand what your drivers are and what their drivers are, right? From minute one. Otherwise, that's not going to work. So let's say, for example, I am a small company, and I consider small, a few hundred million, even if I have some revenue, a few $100 million bucks. Mm-hmm. What kind of person is going to do well in that company? The person that does well would come from one of those companies, the tech companies, because they know what it's like to be an entrepreneur. They can take all different inputs from their organization and make a strategy out of it. If you're only used to, I don't know, a Pfizer, a Merck, a J&J, I'm just, I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but if you're used to a bigger organization, I guess I should say, the strategy is already handed to everybody. The direction's already handed to everybody. But if it's a small place, I call it helicopter skills. You can helicopter up and down, all the way down to the technical, up to the roadmap and the strategy, then all the way up to the C-suite, right? And you can articulate all those levels, and you're good at that, right? And that's what you like, and that's what you want. Small biotech can give you that. Now, when the small biotech grows, i.e. Regeneron, right? When it goes from, I started working with them when there was 800 folks. Now there's 14,000. But it was a different conversation for me back then. It was very ambiguous. It's a little more clear now, right? Where they're heading and what they're doing. So it's totally different. If you get the person that does that and has that desire to stay entrepreneurial, they'll hang with you till they get to, $1 billion in sales or something. But then they'll either migrate back or go to another biotech if they had a great experience. So to answer your question, I think you can tackle that from the beginning, and it all depends on the individual and what their desires are and what their needs are,
Okay. And do you, as you say, like, there's the demand has grown quite a bit. There is like a shortage of talent. What are companies doing to address that? Are they like coming up with some different ways or creative ways to address the shortage of talent, or do you think they're just finding the talent that they're looking for?
I think they're just digging for the talent, really. I mean, they're just hunkering down and digging harder, because you can't really, you don't want to hire somebody who's looking it up on Google, right? So they are looking outside the industry for the junior level folks. They're hoping to, like I said, groom, bring them in as a data wrangler, right? Get them out of school, get them as an undergrad, and then offer them a master's, because they're going to need a master's to keep going in this field, right? In my opinion. Or they find a good place where they can find folks that have some of the skills from, say a Capital One or whatever, right? That they do a good job with their folks, and you like that kind of skill set. But you don't always find that, but if you do find one, stick with it until it doesn't work anymore, right?
Okay. And is there, like, you talked about one strategy, well, to get the talent in AI, to look outside of the pharma industry. Are there any other like different type of approaches that you're seeing for recruitment by the pharma companies to get the talent in data and AI?
No, I mean, they're not. Yeah, again, they're getting the junior folks. They can try
Yeah.
and get them from each other. They can try and get them from other industries
Okay.
as long as the skills are transferable. But they're not making them. You know, they're not grooming them. They're not
Okay.
bringing. They're not taking the DBA and making them into an AI person or something.
Okay.
You know, again,
Okay.
it goes all the way back to, does that person want to do that, right? Because
Sure. Sure.
you can't make them do what they don't want to do, and they're already going to be. Anybody who's ever even thought about AI is already in it because they can't get away from it, right? So
That's true. That's true. So in terms of retraining, right? Like retraining your own people, right? Because it's always like, hard to get talent from outside. Are they retraining people more, or you're not seeing a whole lot of the
I'm
retraining
not
to?
seeing much of that at all.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
No, because the kids are
It's-
coming out of school and they have it. Now the kids that are
Mhm.
coming out of school, even with 1, 2, 3 years experience, they're making a decent amount of money, as a
Mhm.
say a data
Mhm.
scientist or whatever, and they can
Yeah.
move into all these different areas,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So what advice would you offer to the biopharma companies about how they can ensure they have access to the talent that they need in this area?
I think, well, like I said, I think what they have to do is they've got to think a little more about grooming them and bringing them up, right? The
Okay.
kids that can actually come into these roles and then continue to move through the organization, they're going to be grateful for the opportunity, right?
Okay.
And they'll be able to branch out into, they don't know if they like clinical or commercial or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
if a company, I mean, imagine this, if a company had, how they have what are they called? The training programs where they move people around, the executive training programs.
Mhm.
Imagine if they had an AI training program like that. How cool would that be? I mean,
Yes.
these kids would be all over that. Some of them would,
Yeah.
right? Some of the computer
Mhm.
science kids and such. I think that'd be awesome.
Mhm.
I don't
Mhm.
see it. I don't see it happening yet. I mean, it could, right? But
Uh,
I don't know. I just thought of that here and now. But there's different things that they could do. But again, the talent is um, not not a lot of it there for them right
Okay.
now.
Okay. Okay. And looking at the other side, what advice would you give to AI and data analytics job seekers to get ahead in the biopharma, to go land the right roles and move ahead?
Well, I have a kid that's in data science, and I've tried to. If she's not into biotech, she's not into biotech. But boy, they could. The biotech industry could use any one of them that wants to come into the industry, right? So
Yeah.
my advice to anybody in data science and such would be to at least take a look at the biotech industry because there's or pharma.
Yeah. Yeah.
There
Yeah.
is a need for it both on the commercial side and on the R&D side, right? So
Mhm.
there's a
Mhm.
big need there. Seems like insurance is always kind of doing it, the insurance companies, but that seems like it's more of a linear analysis because the data sets are not as diverse, right? As they are in biotech, whether it be commercial or whether it be R&D. But my advice would be to anybody that's studying in the field,
Uh-huh.
at least
Uh-huh.
take a look at this industry because there's a lot of different avenues, and
Okay.
it's a good place where your work-life balance stays in check
Mhm.
as opposed to a lot of
Yes.
the others.
Yes. Yes. And I know we can't really predict the future here, and right now everything is shaken up with Gen AI. But if you had the crystal ball, how would you see the hiring landscape for AI and data analytics evolving in biopharma over the next few years? Is there any predictions that you?
I think there's more kids, like I said, that are coming into the field, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, let me start with. I just posted something today where just IT overall, right?
Mhm.
Technology overall, the unemployment rate in August was 6% in IT, and in September it
Mhm.
went down to 3.8%. So
Oh,
companies
wow.
are picking up IT professionals, right?
Mhm.
That's obviously AI included, and it's that database person we talked about, that ERP
Uh-huh.
person. So that's everybody. But
Uh-huh.
I do think that the trend is going to continue because of the way that AI, generative AI, data analytics is going to add to the bottom line, right? The leaders are going to see how much smarter and faster their organization can pivot and work if they have just some of this in house. I mean, you've seen it. You point directly to the ROI on this stuff. I know it. You have to, right? So it's great, and once they see it, they're like, wow, this is good stuff. So there is going to be a lot more demand. but it's getting pushed into everything, right? It's getting pushed into, like we said, sales, and we already said commercial and R&D, right? But I mean, your supply chain, your ERP, your human resources. I mean, it's I went to a conference with HR and AI. It was great. It was great the way that they were going through it all.
Okay. Now, with AI coming in, do you see some like basic IT jobs getting lost because now AI can actually automate that?
I don't think so, Amar. I think what's going to happen with these AI and Gen AI roles is it's just going to make us all better, faster, smarter, right? So I think it's going to enhance what we do. But what it's going to allow us to do, you and I, it's going to allow us to focus on higher level tasks, right?
Okay.
So some of the lower level stuff, maybe we're doing comparisons. I don't know. We're coming up with data trends or whatever. The AI and the Gen AI can do that for us, or if we're writing something, right? Gen AI or GPT, Chat GPT can develop something for us, and we can rewrite it or redo it. But it's just going to, in my opinion, free us up and make us better, smarter, faster workers. I've even read one of the CIOs that I did one of my podcasts with. He posted something about how he feels that AI is going to make everybody better leaders and better managers by being able to be more in touch with his people and what's going on and those kinds of, which I thought was a different spin, but I think it's great, so I don't think it's going to replace. I think it's going to enhance.
Let's hope so. And thank you very much. Well, Steve Swan, CEO of the Swan Group, thanks for your time today.
Mar, thank you very much for having me. This was great.
Amar, talent's an issue we started to touch on in recent weeks, but haven't taken a deep dive on. What did you think?
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting, of course, as we had imagined, right? That with the booming of AI, and so there is a lot of demand that's for talent. It was interesting, some of the insights that Steve provided about where the companies are looking for people from the industries, more for the experienced leadership roles, whereas for some of these starting roles, they're looking outside the industry, and also talking about the need for data, right? So it's yes, having AI is great, but AI cannot be there without the data. So he's him talking about the need, and the companies realizing the need for people who can do the data wrangling and getting the data in shape for the AI.
Well, data and what we're able to do with it is reshaping the life sciences. Steve talked about the clinical side leading the demand because that's where there's been the greatest ability to put data to work. But he also called research the holy grail. How do you see that shifting demand for talent?
I mean, as you mentioned, right, we are seeing demand across the board. With research, I know there's a lot of like the small companies as well, right? A lot of the small biotech companies. We have had CEOs of many of those appear on our podcast here, who are working on some specific data science problems that will help in really creating novel drugs. So I would say that's going to continue. I know some of these pharma companies are also looking at that, but I think like it's, I mean, the demand has been there, right? And the demand will, I believe, the demand will be there. I mean, what I'm just afraid of is that right now there is the hype. Once the hype goes down, what's going to happen, right? Is the demand going to go down? Are people going to overhire, right? That's something that I'm kind of like thinking about. But I would say like, yes, of course, in research, yes, we are looking for some game-changing things. There will be high demand in research.
You asked about the openness to bringing in talent from outside of the industry versus life science specific talent. The answer depended on what the specific need was, the level being sought, leadership versus frontline workers. Do you think the industry needs to be doing more in terms of training and outreach for a new generation of hybrid workers?
I absolutely think so. I think that's one of the gaps that the companies have. I see a lot of these companies. Some of these companies have figured out what they want to do. Some of these companies haven't even figured out what they want to do. They just want to be in this field right now because of FOMO, right? They don't want to miss out. But in terms of how they are going to groom this young talent, how are they going to have the career paths for these young people? I don't think a lot of companies have really thought through that. They're just figuring out. They're trying to get the people and focusing on the problems that they have. But What does that mean for the new talent? I don't think people have done that. So there needs to be a lot of work that these companies need to do. Because I mean, I can tell you by talking to a lot of the talent in this area, right? When they go to a tech company, they know their career path, right? Like they work for Google, they work for even like a startup tech company, right? 2 years down the road, yes, whatever they have done now, that experience has relevance in their next job. But let's say they do something, work on a specific problem in pharma for 2 years, and they're seeing that the pharma company is not really showing them a career path, and they want to go back to tech. Well, the question is going to be, what they did last 2 years, how is that relevant for tech, right? Because a lot of that is going to be specific to a pharma business question rather than developing necessarily like the new tech. So that's a question that they need to answer. And the pharma companies do need to think about that point of view a lot more.
Well, when you were talking about recruitment strategies and the challenges the industry face, sorry, I'm going to start that over. When you asked about recruitment strategies and the challenges the industry face, you also talked about whether the mission of the industry will be enough to offset the compensation issues to compete with more traditional tech, which may provide a bigger upside with stock options. What do you think the challenge for the industry will be to get the AI and data talent it needs?
It's going to be that why would they come and work for a pharma company, right? And of course, there's a mission. I've in fact talked to a few people who were tech people who, especially after COVID, they actually wanted to move to the pharma industry because they thought that, well, with the pharma companies, it's actually doing good for the humanity that, and then there will be something, they will get more than just the compensation. So they were interested in that. So we have that going for us, but you have to give a good experience to these people. You have to have them, the rest of the things about like how, in addition to compensation, how their engagement is going to be. Are they going to learn about the industry, right? What is going to be the plan for them to understand the business more? Those need to be there. So that's what the companies do need to do more.
I do think that mission is still a powerful driver for a lot of people this industry attracts. Mm-hmm. If you want to hear more from Steve Swan, check out the Biotech Bytes podcast. That's Biotech Bytes, BYTES. Another interesting conversation, Amar. Until next time.
Yes. Thank you, Danny.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Agilisium Labs. Life Sciences DNA is a bi-monthly podcast produced by the Levine Media Group with production support from Fullview Media. Be sure to follow us on your preferred podcast platform. Music for this podcast is provided courtesy of the Jonah Levine Collective. We'd love to hear from you. Pop us a note at danny@levinemediagroup.com. For Life Sciences DNA and Dr. Amar Dravid, I'm Daniel Levine. Thanks for joining us.